What's a secret you'll take to your grave, but you'll share online to get it off your chest? Story 1. In 7th grade, I was invited to a popular girl's birthday party, and I took a massive crap in her bathroom and clogged the toilet. I panicked, so I just walked out like nothing happened. Then when one of the other kids needed to use the bathroom, they came out screaming to everyone that someone had left a massive log in the toilet and it would not flush. Suddenly, the entire birthday party shifted to the bathroom so they could inspect the giant mess I left, and everyone was laughing. I played along and laughed too, maybe a little too hard, because I thought it was absolutely hilarious that everyone was staring at my mess and had no idea. I specifically remember one of the kids saying that obviously it was not one of us, because how would that even be able to come out of a kid? Anyway, everyone eventually decided it was her stepdad who did it. I will never stop laughing at the fact that everyone thought a 12-year-old girl's bathroom disaster belonged to a middle-aged man because it was so nasty. The girl whose house it was ended up becoming a major bully in high school, so I felt even more satisfied walking past her, knowing they once had to clean up my mess. Story 2. The first and only time I ever stole something in my life was when I was 8 years old, and it was from my neighbor who was having a yard sale to take his kids to Disneyland. He had a Nintendo DS game of backyard baseball, and I had the money for it. It was $5 and I wanted it. I went up with the money and he told me he was going to give it to the landlord's kid, who was my age, for free. I was so mad and annoyed that he was going to get the game without paying. A few hours later, I went back outside and saw he was not there. I walked up to the stand and saw the game was still there, so I took it. I also grabbed a bag of golf balls he had marked for $10 and a few more games that were marked $1 each, so he would not think it was me. I ran back into my apartment and the guilt immediately started eating me alive. About 30 minutes later, he knocked on my door and asked if I had taken the games because he knew I wanted one. I told him no and said I had been inside the whole time. I never played any of those games because I felt so bad I could not even put them into my DS. I wanted to take them back, but I knew I would get caught. They did end up going on that trip, and the landlord's kid was mad he did not get his game, which I did not mind because I did not like him. I still feel that guilt, and I still remember the prices of everything and the way that Stan looked. Story 3, I was in a friends with benefits situation with someone I did not know very well a few months ago, and she was really into the fact that a younger guy was interested in an older woman. I was 24 at the time, and she was 40, and honestly, I was into it too. But one day she stopped talking to me out of nowhere, and I found out it was because she went to jail. She had previously told me she used to have a minor substance problem, which I was sympathetic about because my mom did too, so I assumed she was dealing with lawyers or parole or something like that. I was shocked to learn the truth. It turned out she had assaulted her 14-year-old son and was in my area awaiting trial. And she was so fixated on our age difference because she was a predator and had been using me as a substitute. I was disgusted and horrified when I found out, but it made some of the things she said during S make more sense. I had no idea at the time, and I probably should have talked to someone about it, but I convinced myself that trying to forget it would work. For the most part it has, but I will never tell anyone I know personally about it. Story 4. I thought I was dying the other day, possibly from a heart attack. I had been neglecting my house badly. The dishes were beyond disgusting and clutter was everywhere. I'm not trying to throw a pity party, but my fiancé had broken up with me recently. I went through a painful physical situation and I was a depressed, unmotivated mess. While I was considering calling an ambulance, it occurred to me that if I died, someone would have to clean all of this up and associate my death with that filth. I live alone in the country, and I realized it might take days before anyone checked on me. So I cleaned. I rushed, starting with the dishes. At one point, my heart felt like it was fighting against itself. Something felt very wrong, so I scrubbed faster, trying to finish before I died. I kept thinking, finish the dishes before you die. I moved on to the rest of the house while my chest hurt and my breathing got worse, and I was genuinely terrified. When I finally finished cleaning, I broke down crying. I wrote down who should get what, the gun safe code, and some goodbye messages because I truly believed I was dying. I put my cat outside so she would not be trapped and forced to survive by eating my body. I laid down on the kitchen floor so my body would not ruin the carpet and waited. Eventually, I fell asleep from exhaustion. I am going to get my heart checked soon. I am 38. I have never smoked, but anything can happen. What I did was stupid. I am a loved member of my community, and instead of calling emergency services, I accepted that I might die and worried more about my house being disgusting. That still messes with my head, and I am trying to understand why I did not ask for medical help. Story 5. When I came back from my third deployment to Iraq in 2007, I was not myself anymore. And honestly, I barely feel like myself even now. I felt completely alone, like I had nobody with me, even though I had a wife, kids, and family back home who always cared about me. I felt numb and had no one I wanted to talk to. I needed to feel something, so I started going to massage parlors, browsing classified ads, and meeting random women online. It even got to the point where I did something every Friday just to try and feel anything at all. None of it worked. I bought a $1,400 Bulldog, rest in peace Semper, and a nice truck I could not afford. I was constantly spending money trying to feel better, but I still felt empty. Here I am 15 years later, and I barely feel anything. My kids help, but I feel like I messed them up too much to truly connect with them. Sometimes I think about getting in the car and driving somewhere far away, but that would hurt my family financially. Sometimes I wish I had not made it back so they could have taken the life insurance and lived a decent life. I hope that someday I can get at least somewhat back to normal. Story 6. A long time ago, I went on a date with my girlfriend at the time, now my ex, to a hibachi-style restaurant for the first time. I ate all kinds of food I normally would not touch, had a decent time, and took the bus home. As soon as I got on the bus, I knew there was trouble. My stomach was churning violently, and it felt like a full-scale battle was happening entirely inside my intestines. I rode the bus for about an hour and made it to around 10 minutes from my home, but I knew I had run out of time. I jumped off the bus, ran across the street in the dead of night into the nearest alley, went behind a conveniently angled dumpster, and unleashed the most vile disaster imaginable. If international observers had been present, I would have been charged with a war crime. I called a nearby friend to come find me about 10 minutes later and bring me a roll of toilet paper. I stood in that alley next to the mess, nearly vomiting from the smell, until they arrived. I used the toilet paper generously and abandoned the scene, then took a long, miserable shower when I finally got home. The next day, I carefully checked the scene of the crime and saw that the business owner had clearly discovered everything and simply pushed the dumpster so it completely covered the mess. I do not know how long it stayed there, but I do know that however long it was far too long. Story 7. I have schizophrenia. An uncle I have never met has it too, so I assume it is hereditary. My doctors do not know, and I will never tell them because I am afraid of being treated differently once that label is attached to me. I attempted suicide at age 15, and afterward in the hospital, they had me fill out a stack of questionnaires. One of them was a schizophrenia inventory. I had heard the word before, but I did not really know what it meant, and I was shocked to realize that the symptoms described were not considered normal and that I was answering yes to most of the questions. In the end, they diagnosed me with major depressive disorder and never followed up on any of the schizophrenia symptoms. For years, I assumed that meant those symptoms were not a real concern, maybe just part of extreme depression. Now I realize they probably never even looked at it. I have 2 master's degrees and I am able to tell what is real and what is not, so I do my best to ignore the hallucinations. I genuinely believe that the way I hear voices in my head was how everyone's mind worked. I later learned that while having an inner monologue in your own voice is normal, having other distinct voices interrupting that you do not recognize as your own is not, and I had always assumed that was just how thinking functioned. Story 8. I met a man online who said he was 14 when I was 13, and I went to meet him at a local hotel that he told me his brother had booked. I met this so-called brother who during an awkward conversation told me he was actually 28 and that we had to enter the hotel separately. Then he substanced me and assaulted me repeatedly throughout the night. I left when he went to shower and essentially erased the event from my mind as if it had never happened. About 4 years later, I began having nightmares, which led to the floodgates opening as I pieced together what had happened and realized all the red flags I had missed. The self-blaming was horrific. I felt incredibly stupid. So I tried to overdose on paracetamol. I remember vomiting and passing out on the bathroom floor, and when I woke up, I was so deeply embarrassed that I had failed to end my life that I cleaned myself up, showered, and pushed that away as well. Everything resurfaced again in 2020, combined with horrific work conditions and family drama, and I ended up hospitalized after trying to overdose again. This time it was more serious because I had used codeine, and according to the doctors, I caused damage to my liver and kidneys. Nobody truly knows the full story, and I say full because I was supposed to stay at a friend's house as a cover, but she told her mother, who drove me home, and said she was going to call the house to make sure I was there while my parents were at a barbecue. At 9 in the evening, I said I was going to bed and then left to meet him. My father also vaguely knew I was talking to someone inappropriately because he could read my online chats and had sent a message to that person threatening them if they came near me. Story 9, I moved back into my parents' house after I got fired when I turned 24. I was there for about a month, and every single day my dad would find something to get angry about, and it would escalate into him threatening to fight me. About a month in, I finally snapped and hit him in the mouth with a right hand followed by a left hook. And that was it. I immediately felt overwhelming guilt because he was bleeding heavily from his mouth and quickly started playing the victim. I even tried to hand him a paper towel, and he looked at it before spitting blood at me, which splattered all over the walls. I am genuinely terrified for my mom because there have been times when he choked her until she passed out and beat her badly multiple times when I was a kid, which eventually led to him spending 15 months in state jail. He is a master manipulator, and my mom keeps trying to reach out to me and blame his behavior on a new medication he started taking. I am not accepting that. My entire life he has been an extremely violent narcissist. When I got kicked out, I told him he would never see or speak to me again, and I promise that will remain true. I am done. Story 10. I am fairly certain my dad helped my mom die. The official version is that she ended her own life and my dad found her body. She definitely wanted to die, but I believe he helped her and never told anyone. I found my mother's living will and other medical records, updated shortly before her death and signed by both her and my father. I also discovered that they had previously discussed euthanasia. It is illegal in Germany, but they could have gone to a neighboring country where it was allowed. However, the requirement there was that the entire family, not just my father, but also my siblings and me, had to be involved. My mother did not want that. She did not want to talk to us about it or involve us in any way. It has been 3.5 years since her death, and I have never spoken directly to my father about it. I knew admitting it would hurt him because he is extremely uncomfortable talking about emotions, but it broke my heart to imagine him spending the rest of his life feeling guilty toward my siblings and me for doing this behind our backs. So one time I told him that I wished she had not had to do this on her own, and that I wished someone had been with her and maybe even helped her. He did not respond with words, but he hugged me and let out what felt like the biggest sigh of relief I have ever heard from him. He seemed lighter afterward. I hope he truly feels that way. I will not tell my siblings because I do not want them to be hurt even more and then turn their anger toward our father. Story 11. I anonymously reported my childhood best friend to Child Protective Services. She was trapped in a horribly abusive relationship, and her daughter was clearly being affected by it. My friend was forced to live in a house with a hoarder and was not allowed to clean anything, to the point where the front door could barely be opened and there was rotting food everywhere. The worst incident happened when her boyfriend, in a drunken rage, shoved her while she was holding her baby. The child was only 1 month old and incredibly lucky that my friend took the full impact of the fall, which left her with a concussion and 7 staples in the back of her head. Another time, her boyfriend locked her out of the house while her 2-month-old baby screamed inside for hours. He texted her that he would never allow her to see their daughter again, all while ignoring the baby's cries. My friend's hands were raw from pounding on the front door, and she eventually got back inside by climbing a drain pipe to a second-story window. She left him for 2 weeks after that, but it did not last. After all of this and more, my friend still refused to leave and believed her boyfriend loved her. That was when I called Child Protective Services. They showed up and told her she had to leave or she would lose her daughter. That was the push she needed to finally walk away and never go back. This was 4 years ago, and both my friend and her daughter are doing well now. Her ex is currently serving a 10-year prison sentence for beating and hospitalizing the girlfriend who came after my friend. I would do it all over again to protect my friend's daughter. She is a sweet child and deserves to grow up in a safe home. Story 12. I did some truly terrible things when I was younger, the kind of things that could have landed me in jail. And it is the reason my first love and I separated. I was not a good person back then, and because of what I did to her, she eventually left because she could not take it anymore. That loss completely shattered how I saw myself and forced me to truly reflect on who I had become. I took the time to work on myself and I changed. I am with someone new now, and she is amazing. My ex and I are on relatively good terms these days, even though we rarely speak. My secret, I guess, is that I used to be a very different person than I am now. I see so much online about how people never change, but I did. I still struggle sometimes with urges and impulses tied to who I used to be, because old habits do not disappear easily. These days I am able to control those impulses and stop myself from acting on them, but I am still terrified of losing the progress I have made. I am not a saint, and my past makes it hard to call myself a good person, but I am trying desperately to be one. I hate that I only changed after my ex left instead of before. I hate what I put her through, and I hate that those impulses still exist. I have been to therapy and I have been on medication, and they genuinely help. If you ever find yourself in a place like I was, get help. It is not easy and it takes time, but it is absolutely worth it. Story 13. When I was 11, I went on a week-long school trip to a 1940s Army barracks that had been converted into a sports center. We stayed in green barracks-style rooms with bunk beds, 6 kids to a room, and about 100 kids total. My room was at the far end from the toilets, connected by a straight corridor about 150 meters long, with safety glass doors every 25 meters and bedroom doors lining both sides. One night, around 2 in the morning, I had to pee. I climbed down from my bunk, opened the door, and cautiously peeked out. All the lights were off, everyone was asleep, even the teachers, and I was completely alone. The only light came from green fire exit signs, blinking red smoke detectors, and faint light from the bathrooms at the other end of what felt like a haunted, endless corridor. Terrified, I made it through one door after checking for ghosts, soldiers, or imagined horrors through the glass. But then I was stuck between doors, unable to see either end of the hallway. I had to pee badly, and there was no way I was making it to the bathroom. So I made a decision and peed in the corridor. I realized standing in one spot would soak the carpet, so I walked along the wall while aiming up and down to avoid a puddle. My nerves made me move too fast, and I was still peeing when I reached the end, so I turned around and continued along the other wall. Once finished, I ran back to my room as fast as possible. The next day, I saw urine dripping down the corridor walls near my room and soaking into the carpet, and I watched the headmaster and teachers step out of their rooms and notice it. It was never officially mentioned, but I overheard them discussing it quietly, assuming it had to be teenagers from another school. Never underestimate what an 11-year-old can accomplish when terrified of ghosts. Story 14. When I was around 12 years old, my grandparents gifted my parents a new television with a built-in video cassette recorder for Christmas. At the time, those were new and expensive. When we went back to school after the break, I got home early one day and put in one of my dad's adult tapes that I had found. I watched it, then went to eject the tape, and it got stuck. It would not come out no matter what I did. I even tried prying it out with a screwdriver until I realized I was leaving marks. I panicked, put the cassette sleeve back where I found it, and left the tape inside the television. For days no one noticed, and for days I agonized constantly. One day while I was playing Super Nintendo, I heard my 9-year-old sister ask if she could watch a movie on the new television. I heard my mom say yes and that they would try it out. I froze. My sister yelled that there was a tape stuck in the machine. My mom yelled back that they had not even used it and came into the room. My sister pressed play and asked what kind of movie it was. My mom scrambled to turn it off, tried to eject it, and the machine made clicking noises, but the tape stayed inside. She sent my sister to watch something on the other television and called my dad at work, insisting she did not put it in there. My dad came home, could not get the tape out, and took it to a repair shop where they removed the tape but said the machine was broken. My parents never asked me about it. The next time my grandparents visited, they asked how their gift was, and my parents thanked them and said they loved it. Later, I overheard my mom telling a friend that my dad must have watched it one night and forgotten to take it out, and that she hoped her parents never found out. My dad must have figured it out and covered for me, but I will never bring it up. That was more than 20 years ago, and it has never been mentioned since. Story 15. When I was 17, I was involved with a much older man who was tied to very illegal activities. I lived in a dangerous city with a high crime rate, and at the time I was depressed and bipolar, making choices I now deeply regret. My family was very religious, and I was rebelling in every way I could, skipping school and abusing substances. I had an identical twin sister, and although we were never close, as my mental health worsened, we grew even further apart. One day, people connected to my boyfriend decided that I knew too much. Another boy involved with them, about my age, warned me and told me to hide, so I did. My family was used to me disappearing for stretches of time, but this time my sister became especially worried. She went looking for me, visiting places I used to hang out, and speaking to people she knew I associated with. She was abducted, and 2 months later, her body was found at the bottom of a canal, brutally murdered and mutilated. It was officially written off as a random attack on a young woman in a violent city. I know they took the wrong girl. I keep that knowledge to myself because it changes nothing. She was still killed. I do not talk about it often, and in a way I feel that carrying it silently is the least I deserve as punishment for what happened to her. Story 16. Something people notice about me is that I have very few social media accounts, and some say I should live more or that it would benefit my career, but I have a very good reason for avoiding it and keeping what accounts I do have as anonymous as possible. When I was a child, I was diagnosed with Asperger's and placed in a specialist autism school because I could not function in a regular one. At first it was positive. I became interested in school and made friends. But as I grew older, I matured and adapted far beyond most of the people around me. I am an exceptional case, and if you met me, you would never assume I am autistic. I am studying for a doctorate at one of the highest-ranked universities in the country, while many people I knew from school struggle with basic daily tasks. I transferred back to a regular school when I was 14, and since then, people from my past have repeatedly tried to contact me. Some behave inappropriately in public, have disturbing or childlike fixations, and obsess over people. A few of them became fixated on me and pursued me relentlessly. One even somehow found my home address and mailed me gifts, including a manuscript for a children's book filled with extremely inappropriate content. I threw it away immediately. Now I can work, study, and live my life without constant fear of being tracked down. People are confused by my lack of social media presence, but I cannot handle the anxiety. I deleted messaging apps within weeks after being identified, and if I see a familiar name online, I block it instantly. I know I have missed out on events, news, and social opportunities, but I would rather that than be associated with people who once made my life unbearable. Story 17. When I was around 11 or 12, I developed misophonia. My family's eating habits had never bothered me before that. After I told my mom, she eventually told the rest of the family, and they began to mock and bully me for it, except for my dad. My brothers would sometimes come into my room just to make exaggerated chewing noises, and my mom argued with me almost daily because she believed I was faking it. I did not have headphones either. Over time, things improved somewhat, like when my dad was eating in the car, and my mom noticed I was crying from the sound. So she turned up the radio, but back then it was absolute hell. From all the stress, I developed a tic disorder shortly after. Learning from my earlier mistake, I told no one, not even my parents. I suffered alone for years until quarantine, when I was confined to my room every day with no distractions, and my tics worsened until I experienced a severe tic attack. My tics usually lasted between 1 and 5 minutes, but this time they happened every second. My vocal tics became louder and more violent, each one making my throat burn and leaving me nauseous. My body could not handle more than 3 ticks before I lost my voice. And when that happened, I sobbed because the urge to tick was still overwhelming. Even trying to sleep was brutal, and I would wake up exhausted only for the tics to continue. This went on for 3 or 4 days. During that time, I wanted to end my life, not because I wanted to die, but because I desperately needed a break. My parents eventually found out because the tics became impossible to hide, and I was right to be afraid of telling them earlier. I will not say more, but if you read this far, thank you. For all these years, I just wanted someone to listen. Story 18. I had a close friend from kindergarten onward, and when people ask about him, I usually say we drifted apart. But that is far from the real reason. In truth, he crossed boundaries with me repeatedly for almost 2 years. It started in what felt like a harmless way during our mid-teenage years, but gradually escalated into situations I was deeply uncomfortable with. I did not have the confidence or experience to speak up, and I went along with things out of intimidation, confusion, and a misguided sense of obligation as a friend. I am completely straight and never had romantic feelings involved, but I convinced myself that staying silent was easier than saying no. Every time it happened, I regretted it afterward, yet I continued to comply under pressure. Over time, the situations became more degrading, and even when I felt disgusted, I still went along with it. After nearly 2 years, I finally found the courage to cut off contact, ending a friendship that had lasted 14 years. Only a handful of people know parts of this, and even they do not know the full story because I struggle to put it into words. I am deeply embarrassed that I allowed it to happen, embarrassed about how my first experiences unfolded, and weighed down by guilt, especially since I grew up in a very religious environment. Even now, almost 4 years later, I can feel how much it damaged me internally. I have almost no self-esteem, shaped both by this and by over a decade of bullying, and the intrusive thoughts that followed have only become more intense over time. Story 19. I lived with an undiagnosed mental illness for more than half of my life. I was diagnosed last year and started medication shortly after, and for the first time in more than 15 years, I no longer want to die. I was not constantly suicidal, but life felt impossible. Everyone else seemed able to do things I could not, no matter how hard I tried, which left me feeling worthless and terrified of the future. I could not understand how I was supposed to survive decades of adulthood when basic tasks like eating, bathing, or working for more than a couple of hours overwhelmed me. Not existing felt easier, and over time I became numb, because when everything is exhausting, nothing feels enjoyable. No one noticed. My family saw no signs, even though this started in my early teens. My husband thought I was lazy and resented how long my degree took. My friends stopped inviting me out after I declined repeatedly, and most of them met me when my illness had already shaped my personality so deeply that they assumed that was just who I was. On days when I do not take my medication, as advised by my doctor, everything comes back. I lie still, trying not to cry or snap, thinking about how to end my life without traumatizing the few people who care about me. Today is one of those days. No one knows how bad it was, or how bad it still sometimes gets. Story 20. I love my husband, but I do not know how else to phrase it except that I do not feel the way I think I am supposed to feel about him. I spent many years in an abusive relationship where I experienced physical, emotional, financial, and social harm, and when I finally left, I was completely broken. After that, I ended up with a man who was the total opposite of my abuser, so far in the other direction that he barely showed emotion at all, and while he was not a bad person, that relationship was doomed. After it ended, I met my husband. He is kind, funny, thoughtful, and has supported me through addiction and recovery. He has quite literally saved my life, not figuratively, as I was internally bleeding and only hours from death when he came over. And because he works in medicine, he recognized it immediately. He taught me to value myself, supported me when I could not support myself, and has been nothing short of incredible. I love him deeply as a person, and I love the version of myself that exists with him. We have a healthy relationship, and people often comment that we are their favorite couple or how well we communicate and resolve disagreements. He is not the kind of man I ever imagined ending up with, and in many ways, he is my opposite. I sometimes find his behavior and family background puzzling, as his parents are very different from mine and lack the close emotional bonds I grew up with. And while that does not make them wrong, it is not something I ever expected for myself. Despite being an honest person by nature, I feel cruel even thinking these thoughts, let alone voicing them. The part that weighs on me most is that I never experienced butterflies, nerves, or any overwhelming emotional rush with him. I did not feel a dramatic moment of certainty when he proposed, which I barely remember due to substance use at the time, and even our wedding, while a genuinely lovely day, lacked that intense cinematic emotion people talk about. Our intimacy is fine, comfortable, but unremarkable, and my lack of interest is not due to medication, but because I simply do not feel driven by it, aside from our shared desire to have children. Being with him feels safe, easy, and steady, like being with my best friend, but never consuming or passionate, and it never has been. I know the life and family I want, and I know I can have them with him, and that we would be content and stable. But I often wonder if contentment is enough for an entire lifetime. I do not know if I could ever bring myself to hurt him, because he adores me and believes I am extraordinary and I love him too much to cause him pain. Watching my best friend navigate uncertainty in her own relationship makes me realize that I became deeply committed before I fully understood my own feelings, and now I feel trapped by my own loyalty and care. I know how fortunate I am, and I feel guilty for even questioning it, but I carry a constant, quiet guilt that I cannot seem to articulate, knowing he deserves to be loved fully and freely, and not being sure I know how to give that to him. Story 21. I was genuinely planning to end my life when I was 15. When I was 14, I was the most unsocial guy in my class. No one liked me, I had no interest in girls, people thought I was gay, even though I was not. I just was not interested in anyone at that time. I had no real friends, I was depressed, and my classmates avoided me completely. If someone accidentally touched me, they would say, "You," and brush themselves off where my body had touched them. Every boy and girl in my class did this, and it had nothing to do with how I looked or my skin tone. It was just how things were, and I genuinely do not know why. I was excellent in my studies, one of the top students to be exact, and still no one wanted to play games with me or even talk to me. I was the unsocial, neglected nerd of the class that no one wanted near. I was extremely sad during that time, and a few months later my dad passed away. I sank deeper into depression and slowly began thinking about suicide. Then suddenly the pandemic happened right before I turned 15. I had to stay inside all day, studying or playing games without any interaction with my toxic classmates. I made virtual friends through the games I played, finished my school exams, and got accepted into a new college with a completely new set of classmates. When college finally opened after the pandemic in April 2022, I made a few friends. Now here I am at 18, still unsocial but much happier than before, with strong academic results. You could honestly say that the pandemic saved my life. Story 22, I have absolutely no plan for my future. Continuing down the path of the college course I am currently in might not make me happy at all. I have other ambitions, but my parents, along with my uncles, aunts, and my grandmother, unconsciously pushed me toward the field of medicine instead of what I truly want. I want to pursue filmmaking. I know it will be a difficult road, but at least I would not be pretending every time you ask what field I will be pursuing after I graduate from college. I keep repeating that what I am currently studying, which is psychology, is what I will pursue after college. Yet you continue insisting that I should become a doctor. In all honesty, I do not want to become either. I want to work in filmmaking, but I saw psychology as an opportunity that connected to what I learned from films, specifically the understanding of people and behavior. What I hate most is having to repeat myself about what job I will take up, and even more so because questions like these slowly deteriorate my confidence in the course I am currently taking when it feels like it is never taken seriously. I would much rather fully commit to a field I am 100% passionate about, even if you would not take it seriously, than stay in a field I am less passionate about that you still do not take seriously anyway. Story 23, I have been in love with my best friend from the moment I met her. I have known her for around 15 years. She has come and gone from my life over the years, and every time she reappears, I fall for her all over again. I have ended relationships in the past because part of me hoped I might eventually date her, but I never had the courage to ask because I would rather keep her as a friend than risk losing her entirely. I am currently in a 7-year relationship. We are not married, but we probably will be. My girlfriend and I are good together, genuinely compatible. It had been a couple of years since I last saw this friend, but a few months ago, we decided to reconnect, and very quickly we became best friends again. I talk to her constantly and see her multiple times a week. When she is not around, I think about her all the time. I do not think anyone has made me feel this way so consistently for such a long period of time. She has joked while we were out drinking that I am probably her soulmate, and I cannot stop myself from wondering if she might be right. If I were single, I would take my chance without hesitation. But I am not, and it feels insane to leave a stable, healthy relationship for the possibility of something else. So I will probably carry this with me for the rest of my life and regret never taking that chance. There is a dark, irrational part of me that sometimes wishes I would be diagnosed with a terminal illness, just so I could finally say how I feel without having to live with the consequences. Story 24. A few years ago, I went to a party with a close friend and her fiancé, who I only knew casually at the time. After a long night of drinking, I decided to sleep on her couch instead of walking home while intoxicated. Her fiancé came home later than we did. I was half asleep on the couch, and my friend was already asleep in their bedroom. After he got home, her fiancé repeatedly tried to make advances toward me, aggressively, even after I told him no multiple times. He kept coming back into the living room, ignoring my refusals. Eventually, he went to bed, and I immediately texted my roommate to come pick me up as soon as possible. I had panic attacks about it for days afterward and could not bring myself to tell my friend what had happened. I have severe anxiety, and confronting something like that terrified me. I went back and forth in my head for a long time and came very close to telling her more than once. I would sometimes ask her if she was happy with him, and she would always tell me how perfect and in love they were. Eventually, she moved away and is no longer with him, and she is now married to someone else who I truly hope treats her better. I still carry a lot of guilt. I feel like a terrible friend because I know I would have wanted to know if I were in her position. The situation he put me in was unfair and deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes I think about telling her if we ever meet again, but it has been years, and I do not see the point anymore. I think this is something I will carry with me forever. Story 25. I killed a man in cold blood, and I do not regret it. When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years ago, I worked for a government agency. The unit I was assigned to operated at the port in Los Angeles and coordinated with multiple agencies. They had been tracking a man suspected of overseeing large-scale substance trafficking, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking. After months of investigation, we finally had undeniable proof. We obtained a warrant and opened a shipping container at the port, rusted green and covered in mold and sludge. Inside were 21 people, 14 of them still alive. The youngest was a 4-year-old girl wearing a yellow dress with purple flowers, covered in filth. I have never been physically sick the way I was that day. 3 weeks later, after further clearance, we were authorized to raid the man's home, a large waterfront house that looked like any other suburban dream. When we forced entry, he was cooking breakfast. I shot him in the head from about 8 feet away. There was no reprimand, no punishment, no fallout, just a few colleagues saying, "Good shot." After the paperwork was completed and buried, life was expected to continue as normal. I tried, but I never forgot the rage I felt or the certainty that I would kill the person responsible for putting that child in that container. It haunted me for years, making me question whether I was a good person and how something like that could simply be ignored. I still struggle with it sometimes, but I know that girl had a better chance at life because of what happened. I left that agency shortly after. That life was not for me. Now I have a career I love, working as a chef, and I have been married for almost 5 years with a beautiful child. I know without hesitation I would do the same again to protect them. My wife knows the incident happened, But she does not know that I was the one who pulled the trigger, and I do not think I will ever tell her. I do not know if I could live with the way she might look at me if she did. Story 26. I was waiting for the train on my way to middle school one morning. When the train pulled up, I positioned myself exactly where the doors would open so I could get on. A woman suddenly elbowed me hard in the ribs, pushing me backward into the crowd. I saw a flash of red, and my mind went blank except for one thought, that I should help her get on the train since she was clearly in such a rush. I shoved her with both hands and my full body weight. She fell forward up the stairs, and I immediately ran to the front entrance of the train car. I figured it was not a big deal since she fell into other people and not onto the ground. And at worst, she might have bumped her leg, since slipping on those stairs is common. About 10 minutes later and 3 stops before I was supposed to get off, I felt a strong grip clamp down on my wrist. It was the woman's companion who dragged my 13-year-old self to the back of the train car. She shouted that it was me, and the woman I had pushed was seated, which surprised me because it was hard to find a seat during the packed morning commute, and she was breathing shallowly and acting injured. I tried to break free, but the other woman was incredibly strong and said they were taking me with them when they got off because there was too much hate on the train. The commotion drew attention, and somehow the conductor was alerted and stopped the train. A crowd gathered and saw 2 middle-aged white women holding a scrawny Asian kid during rush hour. The seated woman claimed I shoved her and said she had a slipped disc and was in serious pain, and that they were taking me to the police. Several people spoke up, especially a person wearing blue medical scrubs, who said he saw everything and that it was just normal crowd movement and not intentional, like she was claiming. The crowd pressured them to let go of me. By then, the train had been stopped for over 10 minutes. After separating us, they led me back to the other end of the car, and the person in scrubs asked if I was okay and said I was just trying to get on like everyone else. I nodded, and he told me to go. I walked the rest of the way to school and arrived very late. Story 27. My cousin intentionally tried to catch people she believed were lying about food allergies by secretly adding small amounts of the allergen into their meals at a restaurant where she worked. She often claimed that customers lied about allergies just to control what was on their food. Eventually, she was caught and fired after she nearly killed a young girl who had a severe onion allergy. My best friend, who worked at the restaurant at the time, told me the family were regular customers and that no matter what they ordered, everyone in the family always asked for no onions. The cook was aware of this and was extremely careful to keep onions completely away from their food. My cousin, not believing the allergy was real, took a small amount of chopped onion and hid it in the girl's meal so it would not be noticed. The child took a bite and immediately began having trouble breathing. An ambulance was called, and her father used an epinephrine injector, but she still struggled to breathe and was hospitalized. The parents were furious and demanded the restaurant owner pay the medical bills, and they wanted to press charges, but there were no cameras and no one admitted responsibility, so my cousin was not arrested at that time. The owner later learned it was her and chose not to report her, but kept her final paycheck to help cover the medical expenses. About a year later, my cousin was arrested after nearly killing her boyfriend in a similar way, knowingly exposing him to an allergen. She is now serving time for attempted murder because she was fully aware of the allergy and acted anyway. Story 28. I have never shared this with anyone, not even with any of my therapists over the years, because I have always been terrified they would think I am a horrible person. But I am finally ready to get it out so I can begin letting it go. I must have been around 13 or 14 years old at the time. I was desperate to make my parents happy and was constantly doing chores around the house to earn their approval. I was a young gay kid who had no real understanding of what that meant or how it looked to others. One day, while putting ice trays back into the freezer, I noticed a thick layer of ice had formed along the ceiling of the freezer compartment, at least 2 or 3 inches thick. The freezer was on the bottom with the refrigerator on top. I decided to clear the ice to make more space. I laid a towel on the floor, filled a bowl with hot water, and grabbed a spatula and an ice pick. I chipped away, throwing chunks of ice into the sink, and everything seemed fine. When I reached a particularly thick section, I kept pounding at it, even tapping the ice pick with a kitchen mallet. Suddenly, the pick went through. A block of ice fell free, and a loud hissing sound filled the air as gas rushed out. I had punctured the freezer. When metal is cold, it becomes brittle, and I had pierced the roof of it. I panicked, cleaned up quickly, and disappeared to my room or outside, anywhere but there. My parents were not home. Hours later, I heard my mom screaming when she realized the refrigerator was no longer cold. They assumed it had simply broken. They could not afford a replacement, so we used a cooler on the patio with ice packs for weeks, maybe even months. At the time, I was already on thin ice with my parents, who were deeply unhappy that their firstborn son was gay, and I was convinced that if I admitted what I had done, I would be cast out or worse. Eventually, we got a new refrigerator, though I do not remember how or when. It remains the biggest thing I have ever broken and the deepest secret I have never shared, not with partners and certainly not with my parents. We no longer speak. My mother once told me all gay people are inherently evil, directly to my face, and doubled down when I reminded her I was gay. That ended our relationship, though it had been deteriorating for years. My father felt disgusted by my existence and wanted nothing to do with me unless I lived as a straight, religious man, despite me being Jewish by birth and identity. He later left, moved to Ecuador without saying goodbye, and cut contact entirely. This may seem pathetic compared to other secrets, but it is mine. Thank you for reading, and please do not judge me too harshly. Story 29. I truly believe that my existence is what ruined my family's life and future. If I had never been born, my parents would have had more time, money, and energy to give to my siblings. They would not have struggled to raise another child so soon after my brother, especially since I could not use his things, being a different gender with different needs and preferences, forcing them to buy everything new. If I had not existed, that effort could have gone toward my brother and older sister, and when my younger sister was born, they might have been far more stable. Maybe my mother would not have endured such a fragile pregnancy. Maybe my older sister's obsessive tendencies and deep self-hatred would have been noticed earlier and treated properly. Maybe my brother could have continued in sports or computer science, possibly studying abroad or attending a better college. Maybe my younger sister could have pursued medicine like she dreamed of, instead of settling for something more affordable. Maybe my parents would have had a healthier relationship and would not still argue about how to deal with me, how to speak to me, or how to understand me. I feel like my presence alone disrupted everything, that every struggle traces back to me, and that if I had never existed, all of their lives would have turned out better. Story 30. I got a friend of mine fired from a job we both worked at. She was a very physically affectionate person and constantly leaned on people, hugged them, touched their arms, pinched them, and things like that. I never liked it, but because I am a man and she is a woman, I only mentioned it once or twice and then stopped. Because the general attitude where I live is that unwanted physical contact from women is often not taken seriously. After about 2 years of this, a separate scandal involving a physically inappropriate manager happened at our workplace, and the company introduced a new reporting system that bypassed management entirely and allowed anonymous reports unless legally required otherwise. Over the years, I had complained directly to her and to our manager, but I was always told she was just being friendly and that it was not a problem. When the scandal happened, people at work started openly discussing discomfort with physical boundaries, and I realized it was not just me. She mostly did this to male coworkers, and several of them had complained and been dismissed the same way I had. So I used the new system and reported what had been happening, including management's lack of response, fully expecting nothing to come of it. Instead, someone from corporate showed up, interviewed everyone, transferred our manager to another location, and fired the woman. I have never said anything about my involvement because we share many friends and several of them still believe she did nothing wrong. Story 31. I have been exaggerating my past experiences with suicide and self-harm for more than 10 years, and sometimes I feel like a fraud. When I talk to mental health professionals, close friends, or people who know me as a mental health advocate, I say things like, I tried to end my life multiple times, or that I self-harmed in high school, keeping it vague but implying it was very serious. The truth is more complicated. I had 2 incidents where I came close. In the first, when I was 15, I sat on my bathroom floor for a long time holding a full bottle of painkillers, but I never actually took any. I was interrupted when my brother knocked on the door and told me we had to leave for a family event. In the second, when I was 19, I went to the stairwell of my college apartment building with a belt and tested how it might fit on the structure there, but I never actually followed through. I stopped when a friend called me needing help with a class project. As for self-harm, I did cut my wrists in high school. Twice, very shallow, with only one faint scar left. Even then, I knew part of me was doing it for attention, and I do not think I could have gone far enough to seriously hurt myself because I was too scared. Now I sometimes feel guilty, like I overstated how bad it was, maybe for validation. At the same time, I do have diagnosed bipolar disorder. It runs in my family. And I did spend years in deep depressive episodes feeling like I wanted to die, even if I never fully acted on it. When I hear others share their stories, I sometimes think I did not have it that bad, and that feeling of guilt still follows me. Story 32. When I was around 9, social services manipulated both me and my mother in ways I did not understand at the time, slowly transitioning me into the care of my so-called father and stepmother without ever explaining it clearly. One random Friday, I hugged my mother goodbye, fully believing I would see her again on Sunday, and left to spend the weekend at my father and stepmother's house, where there were 5 other children, 2 of them my father's. When I arrived, I hugged him and told him about my week like everything was normal. Later that Sunday, around 5 in the evening, I asked when I would be going home, and my stepmother calmly told me that I was not going home, and that my mother never loved me or wanted me. My heart completely shattered that day. I had no choice but to live with them permanently, and I hated her children and still do. A few years later, when I was around 10 or 11, we found out that the man I thought was my father was not actually my biological father. I started seeing my real father, and about 2 years later I moved in with him, mainly to escape my stepmother's unstable household. When I turned 14, my mother started seeing me again, and I loved it. Eventually we talked about the weekend I was taken away, and my mother told me that my stepmother had told her that I never wanted to see her again and that I did not love her. I was furious. I still cannot understand how someone could do that to a mentally unstable mother and her child. I have not spoken to my stepfamily since, and I live with my mother now. Story 33. When I was in year 6, so around 10 years old, I decided I wanted a day off school and told my mom I had really bad stomach cramps. I had done this before, so she did not fully believe me, and I exaggerated the pain to make it convincing. By the evening, I did not want her to think I had faked it and then suddenly recovered, so I said the pain was getting worse. At that point, she called my dad, told him how much pain I was in, and he suggested calling an ambulance because it could be appendicitis. By then, I knew the lie had gone too far, but I could not back out because the ambulance had already been called, and I was terrified of how much trouble I would be in. I was taken to the hospital, where I continued to dramatically perform the pain. They monitored me overnight and into the next day, ran tests, and kept focusing on my appendix. The scans came back normal, but whenever a doctor examined me, I screamed when he touched certain areas of my stomach. Eventually, they decided that even though the appendix did not look inflamed on the scan, they did not want to take the risk and chose to operate. I ended up having my appendix removed for no real reason and have never admitted the truth to either parent, even though nearly 20 years have passed. I still worry about how quickly they decided to operate on something that did not appear to be a problem. And I often wonder what the surgeon thought when he removed a perfectly normal appendix, especially since nothing was ever said about it afterward. Story 34. This is probably fairly dark, and I truly hope that what I saw was not what I think it might have been. Years ago, I was a pretty avid hitchhiker and was dating a guy at the time for around 8 months or so. I had just turned 20 and my boyfriend was 19. While we were stopped in his hometown, I found out he had been cheating on me with a 16-year-old girl. One morning he woke up, and before I could even say anything, she knocked on the door and he left with her. I completely broke down and ran toward the train tracks, crying and panicking. Normally, when I reached the tracks, I would turn right and walk along them, looking for deer skulls or anything interesting I might find. That day, for no particular reason, I turned left instead and walked several miles into what was basically the middle of the woods. As I rounded a corner, I noticed a large blue tarp spread out beside the tracks with a shopping cart nearby. And then I realized that feet were sticking out from one end. It was extremely hot outside, around 85 degrees, and it did not seem possible that someone would be sleeping under a tarp in direct sunlight like that. Just as I was processing what I was seeing, I received a phone call from a close friend who was completely distraught in dealing with something serious, asking for my help. Still in shock, I turned around and left the area. I ended up leaving town about a week later. I still think about it often, and I sincerely hope it was just a local homeless person sleeping and nothing more. Story 35. I stole my classmate's copy of New Super Mario Bros. For the DS because my parents would not let me get any new games, and he lent me his console during recess. I told him I had lost it, and he got upset but never questioned how it could disappear since you have to go out of your way to remove it. He told the teacher, but she hated video games and said this is what happens when you bring expensive things to school and do not take care of them. Before that, all I had were cheap shovelware games and bargain bin titles. That stolen cartridge was my first real Nintendo game and turned me into a lifelong fan. Video games became my main hobby, and I am still a huge Mario fan. I will never admit it all started with a stolen game in second grade. That one act shaped my entire life. I became very introverted and physically weak because almost all my free time went into gaming. I rarely watched movies or shows. It affected my social skills and self-esteem because I always felt awkward talking about my hobby. When people asked what music I listened to, saying video game soundtracks felt embarrassing. And when people talked about famous actors, I had no idea who they were. It felt lonely, but I also did not mind much. People say gaming is common, but I was almost exclusively a Nintendo fan, which made it hard to connect with people who only played shooters or sports games. Over time, things improved. I expanded my interests, met more people, found a girlfriend, and balanced my life. But from about age 7 to 18, it was just me and video games. I never realized until much later how that one moment in second grade shaped everything. Sebastian, if you ever read this, I am sorry. I will pay you back one day with interest. Story 36. My late husband struggled deeply with alcohol and abusing his anxiety medication. People knew he had issues, but they never knew how severe it really was. I came close to leaving him and even looked at divorce lawyers because I realized he was not getting better. He accidentally overdosed on pain medication after running out of his anxiety meds again. I will never tell anyone how bad things truly were and let people believe he was just going through a rough period and made some poor decisions. No one understands how often he came close to overdosing before that. I lived in constant fear of finding him dead. I mourned the life we had planned that would never happen. We wanted a house, but he could not keep a job. We wanted children, but he never would have been healthy enough to be a good father. He died at his parents' house, and a part of me felt relief that the constant fear was finally over. My current husband knows more than anyone else, and even he does not know how bad it truly was. I remarried, bought a house, had a child, and built the life I once dreamed of. My late husband was a good man, just very sick, and that is how I want the world to remember him. I will keep the darkest parts to myself. Story 37. In my teenage years, I was really interested in a girl from my class. We started spending time together and everything felt promising. One day at the park with friends, a guy who was already there asked if I was dating her, and I confidently said yes. He immediately started bragging that he had already slept with her, made crude comments, and everyone laughed. I felt completely exposed but kept my composure and joked back instead of reacting, even though I was heartbroken. I was a virgin at the time and believed what he said because I had seen them talk before. I never confronted her, and the relationship eventually faded because I could not handle it emotionally. More than 10 years later, I was working part-time at a private school when I ran into the same guy. We talked casually and he told me his wife worked there. When I saw her, something dark clicked in my head, and I decided to pursue her as revenge for what he had said years earlier. I had a good reputation at work, and it was easy to connect with her. We talked, flirted, and eventually started a secret relationship. She told me her husband worked in another city and was rarely home. This continued for months until one day she received news that her husband was missing. He was later found dead, killed by someone who mistakenly believed he was involved with their partner. I felt overwhelming guilt afterward and have never spoken about it since.